So today we have a really strong support. We have Lei and we have Jane as our course coordinators. I see Carson, and I think there are some other course leaders will join the call later. So that is great. I actually can't share my screen right now. I just made these slides really quickly about the today's timeline topic, and also do a lot of introduction of YouTube. If you, I feel like folks already know YouTube pretty well, but I think since we're recording and have some other people do not attend the live session with us, so I think it's good to do a proper introduction of YouTube.
Proper introduction of us both, or should I chat?
Yeah, just like say who you are and what you do. That's it.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know how you define a proper introduction. That's well, a brief introduction, actually.
Yeah. So a little bit about me, folks. I'm currently an instructor at Nate. Beforehand, I worked at the Organic Box, which was basically how to kind of do food packing groceries to your door. We did fantastic kind of like pieces along there to kind of like automate our warehouse in our e-commerce shop. So that was pretty cool. Before that, I worked at the government, kind of working on their open data platform, which is something that I'm really passionate about, data to the people. Before that, I worked a little bit at Strathcom Media. So that's kind of my professional career. I've done a lot of other jobs kind of relating to programming systems, networking, and I really like Python. So this is one of the reasons why I've decided to teach this course. Earlier this year, I taught with Stanford as a code in place section leader, which was pretty cool. And now I got the opportunity to talk here, which I'm super excited about. And for some reason, I don't have the videos on my screen, but I'm just really excited to do this, folks. This is actually a previous talk that I've given at PyCon Canada. I will be kind of going through it. So if there's any typos or anything old on there, just let me know. But we're going to learn about RESTful APIs, and that's a little bit about me in 2 minutes.
That's great. And you also forgot to mention that Dan is also the Edmonton Pi Meetup organizer. So
wow,
yeah.
I'm an idiot. So as well, because I was just trying to, I'm a little bit scatterbrained. If you folks are in Edmonton, we actually are having our meetup this Monday, which is going to be really cool. I'm going to kind of organize and facilitate some Advent of Code challenges, and you're going to program with some awesome developers. Hopefully, I'm going to do a little bit of pair programming where people are going to work as teams to be able to try and solve these coding challenges together. So again, come, it's going to be fun. 6:30 p.m. tomorrow. I'm going to facilitate, and if you can't get enough of me here, you can get enough of me there. Thank you so much for reminding me that, Zinli. I am all over. I'm all over the place. So my apologies as well for the extra time here.
No worries, and you can also send the meetup link to our Slack channel later.
Absolutely.
And over to Frank for your self-introduction.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Franklin. My title is integration lead at Sequent. Yeah, Sequent is a company that does like geological modeling and sort of data management, mostly for the mining industry. But I've been building sort of REST APIs and client libraries and open source tools in Python with Sequent for the past 5 years or so. I don't know.
Cool.
That's not as long as Dan's, but
that's great. I think today's class gonna be really cool because we're gonna learn the first-hand industrial experience from both of you. So I think I'm just gonna stop sharing, and Daniel, you can start. And when do you want Lei to kind of like give your hands up for break?
Come again, sorry, is that a question for me or for?
For you, so for a kind of like a time check.
Yeah, I can, I've got a time beside me. I'll ask at about, in about 45 minutes, whether or not we can, whether or not people want to see kind of like or take a break, if that's cool with you.
Sounds great. Okay, it's all over to you now.
Great. I can't, okay, I can share now. All right. So I can share as well. Do you folks see me okay in the chat? Yes? Loud and clear?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. This is exciting. So today, what I'm going to talk about is an introduction to how to create a RESTful API from scratch that's authenticated with Django, Django REST Framework, and Joser. Joser is going to be a small part of this, but I still want to be able to get people to sign up for a RESTful API. So again, that's what we're going to be doing. A couple of prereqs, if you haven't done this before the presentation, this is all going to be on an IDE. So you can use VS Code, you can use something like Sublime, you can use anything. I'm going to be using Sublime. Essentially, I'm just going to be editing files. You can even use Vim, but I'm sure that if you are using Vim, you would have told people already. So that's just something, a little bit of a bad joke there that you can use on your own. But again, this is how we're going to program. I'm going to be sharing my one screen. I'm going to be flipping through this, my text editor here, that you can hopefully see, my terminal, okay, which you probably have, that Python is not good for web development. Explain why to do it today. Yes, I will definitely talk about that, Samir. And we will, sorry, catermission. I will talk about kind of some myths around web development and some pieces there of which I don't necessarily agree with, but we'll definitely talk about whether it's good for web development. So again, this terminal, if you're using VS Code, this is built in. You can log into PowerShell or Windows subsystems for Linux, and this is going to be something that you can use to be able to do this, okay? I'm also going to share another kind of browser, which is going to be where I'm going to be showing all of the results, because I'm going to make this along with you, which is going to be an interesting experience of live coding as I'm kind of doing this, okay? So again, I'm on Ubuntu. So the instructions are going to be a little bit different. Essentially, if you're on Windows, use PowerShell or Windows subsystem for Linux. If you're on Mac, you can use Terminal or Bash, or if you're on VS Code, there. I'm going to be using a command, a couple of commands like cd, which is change directory. But the other thing, sorry, folks, catermission. The other thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a command called ls. And if it says that it's not recognized, you can use dir, okay? Some knowledge that is nice to have, but not necessary is Git. You can download this entire thing with or without Git if you ever get stuck. I might not have time to answer all the questions just in case we are going over time, but you can clone it for later if you want to study some of the pieces to be able to do that. Some basic knowledge of Django is all right, but it's totally cool if you don't. This is one of the larger web frameworks in the Python ecosystem alongside with Flask. This is more of a batteries included. Flask is more of a stripped down framework. Is one better than the other? No, you just, it's different approaches, different use cases for them. They're both great web frameworks to be able to use. Okay, so enough preamble. What are we going to do today? And why are you here, right? So we're going to talk about RESTful APIs. So we're going to talk about why it's important. We're going to talk about what the heck is it. we're talking about who uses it and some places where you can discover some more RESTful APIs for yourself. Now, then we're going to go into the full shebang of building our RESTful API. So we are going to create our environment and install packages. So that's going to be with the virtual environment. We are going to create our Django project in our environment. And I'll probably talk about Django and the web role into some of those. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat for 2 seconds. I'll talk about more when we talk about Django, where Python lies in the web ecosystem, just to kind of give you folks a little bit of a little bit more knowledge there. We are going to create a Django project in our environment. We're going to install Django REST framework and Django, and Joser packages to be able to kind of get everything in there. Then we are going to hook up authentication. So basically an endpoint, which you're going to discover how to use and make it so that you can configure it, or we're going to configure it in our web project, and we're going to hit that endpoint. Then we're going to create an app, okay, which is kind of like a small piece of functionality to a website in Django. We are going to add models to it, which is basically how we interface with the database. We're going to add it to the admin, which is a way to add data to our database. We're going to add some serializers, which is basically how to transfer information back and forth. We're going to go into views, which is basically how you hit them, URLs, how to lap them, and create RESTful APIs. I'm going to talk more about all of these pieces as well, Golan. So that's, I'm going to talk more about this in detail. I just want to kind of discuss what we're going to do before we do it. Okay. If we have time, we're going to discuss how JavaScript can consume our APIs, deployment to Heroku, how you can do that, how you can add a lot of data with management commands. I'm going to discuss this if we have time. Okay. Now, before I start talking about what is Django, what is Flask, and what how Python is there. So we're going to use FastAPI in the second part of our lecture today. So that's going to be with Franklin, which is going to be awesome. Okay, so a RESTful API, the way that I like to explain it is it's just a way to transfer information from a server, which is essentially where you store information and do tasks, to a client. Now, a client is something that can be a mobile app, it can be a website, it can be PGA 2K21 where you're trying to get a high score and it's storing that information. Yes, that's perfect, Carson. Thank you for that. So anything that will consume the information. So this is kind of storing the information, but your apps, say on your phone, this is going to be things that actually consume that information. Okay, so I do have a video because I don't want to go necessarily completely in detail on kind of that piece. But again, RESTful APIs, you are sending information over the internet, and RESTful APIs, especially with JSON, it's basically English, how computers will talk to each other and send information so that they can do tasks. Okay, it's used by mobile apps, most websites that you go on. It's used by data scientists and machine learning professionals to get data into their pipeline so that they can get a whole bunch of information. And as well, I have a couple of pieces here that are really fun. So for examples of RESTful APIs that you can use in your own projects, Awesome Public APIs is a list of so many public APIs that you can consume. So we're actually going to create it. We're not going to consume it as much today. But again, here's examples. And as well, the Google API library. If you want to do some fancy computer vision or interact with the Google Cloud platform, these are some really there's a lot of really interesting APIs there for you to explore. And I know that this is a Google Developer Group presentation, so I thought I'd give a shout out to the Google Cloud Platform because it is awesome. Now, what are we doing today? We're going to create one of these, which is really interesting. Awesome. Okay, great. Now, I know that I've gone over a little bit quickly on what we are going to do and what is a RESTful API, but is there any questions regarding that? And I'm going to see if there's a pattern as we move forward here. All right, cool. All right, so what are the packages we're going to use and why are we going to use them, right? So we're going to use Django. So Django is a web framework. So I always say web frameworks or frameworks and libraries are a little bit different. Libraries, you call their code. Frameworks, they call your code. I know that that's a really kind of high level way of looking at it and a really kind of simplistic way, but essentially it's a web framework. It's going to handle requests and responses. And it's going to be also interfacing with our database, which gives us an object relational mapper to be able to kind of interact, add stuff, remove stuff, and do whatever we want there. So Manny's got a great question. Why is it called a RESTful API? So it stands for Representational State Transfer. And essentially, it's just a way to kind of do your CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. And there's a kind of like a standardized way of, with your methods and status codes to be able to do that. So RESTful, normally APIs, they can be something like a library in your code. So this is more going over the interwebs and getting some of that information. And that's why it's called RESTful. So again, a little bit of a loose description there. It's going to make more sense as we go along, but it's not to be confused with an API that is kind of written out as code. I know that I'm going to lean on my course leaders as well to be able to kind of have that representative state transfer. There we go. Thank you. So we're going to use Django. This is the web framework that we're going to use. This is a really popular web framework. Now, as well, there was a little bit of a note here. Python is not good for web development. I know that Carson kind of answered this. Python is fantastic for web development. This is used by a really small company called Instagram and has been used in very large scalable applications. I know that a lot of kind of people in the computer science realm will say Python's slow, but it scales up really quickly. And again, it is pretty fast. And most times I've only hit the limit of Python once where it's not fast enough for me. And that's when I was doing some AI stuff. So again, that's not there. So Django's great for web development. It's used by some pretty large companies, large and small, and you can use it there. So the second package that we're going to use is Django REST Framework. So Django REST Framework is really going to simplify the creation process of our REST API to interact with our database, essentially. Now, Joser is going to handle our registration. We're going to hit that at the end. So hopefully not going to be able, or you're going to be fine with that. So I'm going to create a folder for our project. So you're going to need to do that in your terminal. So if you can do mkdir, my super cool project lol, that's a good way to be able to do that. For myself, just to show you, I called mine GDG class. So how am I going to, what you would write here to make a similar one is GDG class. That would be how you do it. I'm not going to make one because I would just have to remove it there. Okay. And this is going to be where we're going to work in our entire class. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to create an environment. So this is a really challenging topic for new people to Python and the whole kind of packaging ecosystem. But essentially, you don't want to install things globally on your system because you might have a different version of the same project somewhere else. So you want to keep it isolated to that project. And what we're going to do is we're going to do that exactly. I'm going to create a virtual environment, which is just going to store all of our packages in kind of a nice little isolated way so that it doesn't collide with anything else. And the first way, or the first kind of command for myself to do this is Python 3 venv and do it in the same directory. Now let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go Python 3. I'm going to do .8. Again, you can use Python 3, which is fine. And I'm going to create a virtual environment right there as I'm doing it. And hopefully this is not going to take forever, but essentially what that's going to do is it's going to create a directory here with venv in it. So this is going to be where all of my packages live. Now, I want to activate it. Now, how do I know that it's not activated? I can see here, there's nothing before it. It's just my terminal name. So let's go ahead while my cat is beside me and he really wants to participate in the class. I know, Gambit, you want to participate in the class. Right? So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to activate it. So this is going to make it so that my active Python is my virtual environment. It's not going to look at the global Python that I have installed or other versions of Python that I have installed. It's going to look at my version within here. So I've created a virtual environment that's going to be Python 3.8. So it's got isolated there. So I'm going to go right in there, source, venv, bin, activate, and you're going to see here, right after you execute this, you're going to see in brackets on the left side, the name of your virtual environment. So I called mine venv. I just find it kind of a nice name when you put it in your folder. Right there, I'm going to activate it and have it so that when I actually just write Python, it doesn't look anywhere else. And it's going to just say, hey, Python 3.6. So whenever I write Python manager.py, it's in my virtual environment. So it's not looking at any other versions of Python. And if things aren't working for you, it might be because you don't have the virtual environment installed there. Okay. Can I just use the env we did from last week? You can, but you could just create a new one because those two commands are right there. And if you have Python installed, you should be able to, yeah, because should be nothing that collides. So it's up to you. You can use last week's or you could use this week's. How to quit the current virtual environment. You could do Control D. Shit. Oh, pardon me. Deactivate. My apologies. That was a bit of a slip up there. Temp. And GDG. And as well here, source activate right there. Thank you. I had this cough and it's been there all day. Now, one thing, as I'm kind of going through, you could do install the package name, Python m-pip. This is great because now it all comes in one package in Python rather than kind of having fragmented versions. You can use pipenv. I've used it all the time, but you can just ignore these as we move forward. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead And let's install these. So what you could do is you could do python m-pip, install Django. You could do it all separately. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do them all together. So I'm going to install them, Django REST framework. So this is going to make them usable in your kind of piece here. As well, you folks might be thinking, well, how do I know if something is installed? I'm on Windows 10 PC. So if you're on Windows 10 PC, this doesn't change. This is just your PowerShell. It just is a different color. My Python, any version of Django, we're going to use the most recent version of Django. You should use, yes, you should be able to go there. My Python 3 command does not work. You might not have Python installed there. If you use pipenv, well, the virtual environment is set. Pipenv, you just use pipenv shell to be able to go there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do python m-pip because this is going to point to my current directory. I'm going to install Django REST framework, Joser, and Django cores headers. Okay, so you could do this how do you quit from Python? Deactivate, quit, Control D, although don't use the same language that I use there. So what this is going to do is I'm just going through this step. It's installing all of my packages there. So this is going to be fantastic. But what we're going to do is we're going to start our Django project. So Django has this command line utility called Django admin.py start, and it gives you a whole bunch of pieces that you can do. So Django admin.py, it gives you start project, which is going to start and spin up your entire project framework from scratch, which is there. I'm going to need you folks to install all of these. So Django REST framework, Joser, and Django course headers. Okay. So what this is going to do is when we create our project, we're going to do Django admin start project 0 to API. We're going to change folders in there, and we're going to see a couple of files that are really important for our project. We're going to have the manage.py. Now, this is a file that kind of does a couple of handy things like migrations. So any changes to our database, it applies them, runs a local server so that we can test stuff and kind of play around with our project on our computer, and has a lot of the same functionality of Django admin.py and some other things that we might get into or might not, depending on time today. Okay. Again, it's going to also create a folder with the same name in 0 to API. This is basically the main configuration folder of Django in our project. So it's going to give you urls.py. This is going to be essentially all of the paths, the URL paths of your project are going to be defined in some way in that file. The settings.py, we're going to be editing this quite a bit. Now, this is going to be essentially all of our settings for our Django project and settings for kind of third-party applications. You put it all there, okay? As well, it's going to define the apps that we use. As well, it does contain a WSGI, which is the web server gateway interface. We're not going to talk about this a lot, but this is essentially how Django interfaces with web servers. So web servers like Apache and Nginx, which is a larger part of deployment. You can also skip that step and just kind of get it installed with Heroku. I can talk about that a little bit more later on, but again, this is kind of a more advanced piece. I just want to get you folks kind of up and running and started in the basics. Now, once we run our migrations, you're going to see a db.sqlite3 file. This is going to install or this is going to be our database. It's essentially our database as a file. You can go and install Postgres and kind of configure it that way, but that's kind of another step later on if you folks want to do that. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to pause 1 second and just take a look. If you're not using virtual ends, it's okay. It's not the end of the world, but you might not be able to do that. Can't I use virtual environments in Windows? Yes, then. You should be able to. I think that it's just executing / and then the virtual environment activate. But I might have to kind of see there. Yes. Okay, so let's go ahead, let's create our project, and let's go explore these files and what they have here. So I'm going to go here. Can everybody see my terminal? Yes? Okay, so as well as a weird kind of note here, you could do python-m pip freeze, and this is going to show you all of the packages that you've installed in your project. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've got Django installed. So I've got Django admin.py, and this is essentially gives us a whole bunch of options that you're going to see in manage.py as well. But what we're going to do is we're going to start a project, which is essentially I'm starting a website. I want to create the entire thing from scratch. We're going to start from Django start project and go from there. Okay, so I'm going to go Django admin.py, start project, and I'm going to call it 02 API, just so that we can kind of follow the same commands there. So here, you're going to see I've got 2 folders in here. Now, the first folder is venv. The second folder I've got in here is 0 to API. So let's go explore the 0 to API folder. Now, I've got the manage.py, and if I write python manage.py, it's going to give me the same options, as well as a couple of other ones there. Now, this is kind of taking a little bit of time, but it kind of gives us a couple of options that we're going to use later on when creating our project. Create super user and start app and test server. Shell gives us a loaded Python environment in Django for us, which is fantastic. And in our 0 to API folder within it, you're going to see our settings. This is going to be essentially where we set everything, our URLs, WSGI, all the files are there, as well as ASCII, as that's now becoming a standard in Django 3. All right, so we've talked a bunch, but let's actually run our server so that we can see our newly created Django project. So if you run Django manage.py, run server, and you're going to see as well that you've got some unapplied migrations, but that's fine. So I want you to go to your browser now once you run that command. I'm going to go localhost 8000, and you're going to see that you have a newly created Django project. You've got it installed successfully, and if you see this screen, this should be a great success. Okay, so that's kind of your first step is really done. Okay. Now, I've been moving a little bit quickly, and we're going to start to do a lot of kind of the coding pieces. But does anybody, I know that our helpers here have been doing fantastic, but does anybody have any questions so far about some of those that hasn't been answered that you'd like me to answer? Okay. All right. So is the recording of the presentation going to be posted? That's not a question for me. There we go. Carson, yes. Fantastic. So what we're going to do is you're going to see that kind of like red piece here. You probably see that in your terminal as well. Essentially, it just means that you have a couple of things when you've initialized your project that haven't been initialized in your database. Now, this is all about migrations. This is how Django handles changes in the database. database is where you store things again. But make migration, it checks to see if you have any tables in your project that you've changed. And it creates a special file for it, which we're going to see shortly. We're not going to go in depth into this, but it creates a special file that then you can use to migrate, which is going to apply it to the database. So now we're going to run python manage.py migrate because these make migrations for external packages or Django itself have already been created and are kind of specially done for us, so we don't have to worry about that piece. So what we're going to do is we're going to run python manage.py migrate, and the next thing that we're going to see there is that our db.sqlite3, which is our database, that file is going to be created for the first time. And you might say, Dan, is it the very first time? Yes, the very first time. Okay, so when I go here, it's going to apply. These are all special Python files that are applying that information to the database. So now when I do an ls, you can see I've got db.sqlite3. Now, again, if you want larger databases, you could use something like Postgres or MariaDB, because we don't want to support Larry Ellison's yacht team, right? So that is essentially where we're there. Okay, so we've got Django installed. We've got our environment done. We're ready to rock and add a lot of these packages so that we can start adding some authentication to our website and start to create our RESTful API. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our installed apps, and we are going to add a couple of things. One, apps, they could be your own apps that you've created that are kind of pieces of functionality, but they can also be external applications to Django. So what we're doing here is we're going to import REST framework and REST framework.auth token, and that's going to make it so that we can use Django REST framework and we can use the authentication token from Django REST framework, which is fantastic. We're also going to include Joser, which is going to be all of our endpoints for, we're going to include the endpoints for registration, which is going to be Joser, and Django course headers, which is essentially going to make it so that it's accessible from anywhere here. Okay, so here, I'm going to open my Zero API, and this is the settings file as I'm kind of going through it. Okay, so you can see I've got installed apps. There's stuff like middleware, which will be changing very shortly. There's templates. This is going to be some other pieces for if you want to configure HTML in your Django. We can explain that a little bit better and go a little bit more in depth into it. As you see here, we've got our databases, which is our base dir there, some other kind of pieces in our settings. But what we're going to do here is we want to add to installed apps. So as well, okay, so we can take a look here. We want to make sure that Django.contrib auth should be there. Django.contrib auth, all right, that's there, perfect. So let's add REST framework. I think it's, yeah. I always forget that one of them is all lowercase. REST framework.auth token. Okay, as well, we are going to install Joser and Django cores, or it's course headers. Right? So this is essentially what your settings.py file should be right now. Right? Now, you're going to see here so that you can access it from any essentially client, this is what the course middleware and course headers is doing. Now, this is going to be something that is going to be a little bit tricky and a little bit finicky in our project, but this is going to be what we need to be able to add that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the course middleware before the common middleware. And as well, the cores allow origins, allow all origins. You're going to need to add that as well. Now, let's go ahead. So in my middleware here, I'm going to be adding right before the common middleware, I'm going to be adding the Django course or course headers, middleware course headers. This is going to make it so that it's accessible not only from the current site that you're on, the current domain. This is going to make it so that you can access it from many different domains. A lot of people have trouble with this, and it is something that can get really annoying. So we're just going to get it out of the way. We're going to get it there. Now, as well, the cores allow all origins. You're going to need to set it to true. So I'm going to add some configuration to the bottom here. And hopefully this is big enough for everybody. Let me know if it isn't. So I'm going to say course allow all origins is equal to true. Great. So I've got that there. Now, one thing that you'll see, since we have one, configured Django cores, and two, added some things to our project, some apps, you are going to see the same thing that we ran the first time if we run our project. So if I clear it and I go back to my terminal here and I go Django manage.py run server, you're going to see that there are some unapplied migrations. Now, this is from Django REST framework auth token. So what do we need to do? We haven't changed any models or database tables in our environment. So what we're going to need to do is apply that. And we did that with Python manage.py. And that's also common when you install another package here. So it's going to go, we've got auth token. You could see 1, 2, 3. There we go. And if I run Python manage.py run server, you're not going to get those warnings there. It's ready to go. And I'm going to show you as well where you can see all of these tables in our database very, very shortly, which is really, really exciting. Okay. All right. So now, what have we done so far? We've installed the packages. We have actually got them hooked up in our Django project. So the next thing that we need to do here is we need to add the Django REST auth login and Joser to, that is wrong. The Django, sorry, my apologies here. I thought I found that. The REST framework.auth token to our views. And as well, we're going to include Joser to our project so that we have all of the authentication endpoints, and we're going to do a login with our REST client so that we can see that we've got login set up with the RESTful framework. So I'm going to go to my URLs in my package. You can see here, I've got the admin. I'm going to talk about that shortly, which is going to be all of the tables that are in Django. And normally when people create a table, they register it with the admin so that you can interact with it and add data to it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say I'm also going to remove all of this. So I'm going to go REST framework dot, I think it's dot views dot auth token. All right. Auth token. We're going to import the views. Now, these are essentially the get, put, post, delete from the auth token. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another path, which is another kind of URL to it, to our project. I'm going to say v1/auth.token/token, right? And we want to, as well, always have the append these. All right. And what I'm going to use is the views dot, I just want to make sure that I'm doing it. Obtain, come on, obtain auth token. Right. Now, this is going to make it so that when we have this in the file utils.pile, what is the significance of v1? I'll talk about that in a second. My imports are underlined with red. Is it okay? This should be, I don't know, it should, I think that you're talking about urls.py. I'll have to take a little bit of time to take a look at that. What's the significance of v1? V1 auth token, this is just the string, so this is going to be it. The v1 is just a good practice when you're creating your REST APIs, is always to add a version to it. Okay, so we are adding that auth token, and that is going to be it. Okay, so another thing that we need to add is, and I'm just going to copy this just to be a little bit short, but we are adding the authentication classes to the RESTful API. So essentially what you're doing is you're saying, hey, we want to use session authentication. This is going to be your typical authentication where you log into the admin or log into a page. The token authentication, we are going to also remove this first one back and forth, and I'll be explicit when we have that. The token authentication, this is going to be the authentication that's used by our API, which is very, very important. And our basic authentication, you could just add that. These are important to add. So let's go into our settings. I'm going to go to the bottom here, and I'm going to write REST framework settings. My apologies, I'm going a little bit slowly here, but so I'm just having that in the settings so that we can add that. Now, what's great is if you run your server now, you should be able to log in, but we actually don't have a user yet, which is exciting. So if you run your server, which mine is already running, you just keep it running. You can see here my local host. Now you should see page not found. Now you should have some admin. You should have v1.auth token. We can also add in the geoser, which are going to be the register URLs. We can do that really quickly. So just include this path v1 auth, and that's going to have a lot of pieces here. And I'm going to do include geoser.urls. I think that's correct. Yes. Great. Now I'm going to do this for, I included this for a reason. So I included this line for a reason. Now, what is that reason? Now, I want to show you folks that we don't have a user, v1/auth, but as well, Django REST framework gives you this browsable API, which is really, really powerful when you're going through and testing out and seeing all of your endpoints. So here I can go users, and you can see here authentication credentials weren't provided, but we haven't created a user in our Django project yet. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So how do we do that? Now that's done with the Django admin.py, okay? Or sorry, Django manage.py create super user. Okay. So I'm going to quit my server. I'm going to clear it. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do Python manage.py create super user. Now this is going to create a user in your application that is going to be able to log in, edit things. It's a super user. It's kind of like the admin of admins. So I'm going to leave my username. I'm going to say daniel@temp.com. And for my password, I'm going to write temp and temp. Okay. And you can see that the super user is created successfully. Now, one of the things that we haven't talked about so far in our application is the admin. Now, this is basically where you can interact, add data to the tables, which is a really powerful thing in Django. Now, as well, we created a super user that can log into that. So what we could do is we could do that. And since we have the session authentication, once we log into this and we go to our users page, we should see that we actually are logged in now. So this is some exciting pieces to be able to do that. So log in, 8,000. And we actually have to make our project running. And I'm going to go much longer than I anticipated. So I do apologize, but hopefully I've got an hour and a half. So here, what do I have? I've got Daniel. Okay. Now, if I log in, you're going to see here that I have users, one. There's going to be just one user here, and that's going to be me, which is pretty cool. We've created that with our Django manage.py interface, some tokens. We don't have anything there yet. And the groups, there's nothing there. We don't have to talk about that right now because we've got a lot to get to. Now that we've created this, we can see the actual users because we've given the credentials because it is a session-based authentication. So we're going to add that or remove that in 1 second. But let's go see now, if we go to the user list and I refresh this page, you're going to see that I have me. And you actually have your RESTful API there. And you can access this user already. You can access it by the ID. Once we have multiple users, you're going to see them all on the user page, which is all really fantastic. So, one, if you've come this far, you've actually created the first part of your RESTful API, which is fantastic. And if you comment out this line, you can go and actually fire it up in your client. Okay, so the session authentication line. All right. Now you can go open your REST client, right? And you can actually log into it just by saying, all right, I'm going to use the post method. I'm going to go HTTP localhost 8000 v1 auth token. And you always have to add the trailing slash. Now, I'm also going to add the header content type. And we're going to write that the application JSON, right? And what you could do here is you can just write your username. So specify the body. Username is equal to Daniel, comma. Password is equal to temp. All right. And when you send this, you're going to see that you actually get a positive response. We're going to rewind 2 seconds. You're going to see that you get a token here, and this is what you're going to use to actually log in to the rest of the application. Okay, so this is going to be cool. We're going to use this later on. You can save this in a file. I'm going to leave it as is, but we need to move a little bit quickly because I'm taking way too long to do this, but that is totally fine. So this is great because you're able to test your API. You added the content type here. You got the username and you got the token, which is fantastic. That's exactly where we're at. So what we want to do now is we haven't really created any data or any pieces that can be accessed. We've just created the login piece. So what I'm going to do, everybody knows that's been in my class, or everybody that's a friend of mine knows that I love my kitties. And as well, you can see that my kitties have walked around my computer about 36 times so far. So we're going to create a small application that's going to be a small part of our site. So we're going to use the start app. We are going to include it. That's just going to be about cats and how to kind of like add that. So I'm going to go to my terminal. Okay, so we're going to create that part of the site that is going to deal with our cat data. So I'm going to do Python manage.py start app cats. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to essentially create a folder here, and that's going to be essentially our application to our site that's going to deal with our cat data. But what we need to do is, now that that's created, we need to actually include it in the installed apps. So I'm going to go ahead, use that. So cats, and that's included. All right. Now, again, if you want to go more into detail about this, you can take a look at it on some of the Django documentation, because I am running out of time, but it's a single piece of functionality for your site. And you try to keep them segregated as much as possible to keep organized. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to add some database tables, which are essentially models. But models are the special piece in Django that actually allow you to interact with the database as well. I'm going to copy this because I'm running out of time. Okay. Now, essentially, where does this go? This is going to go into your models directory here. Okay. Now, what have I done so far? I've imported models. I've created two tables, essentially. One that's the cat breed, which we are going to use, that has a name and a description. Okay. As well, we are going to use cat, which are going to be the specific cats. Now, the cats are going to have name. We could also add other database fields, such as color, age, what their meow sounds like. I don't know. If they eat too much, if they're fat, I don't know. It's cats. But we're also going to link to the first tables. This is essentially the ORM code. Yes, so models are essentially the object relational mapper. Now, this is going to be the fields in our database are going to be these, anything with field at the end. That's what it's going to be. And the classes are going to be our tables. Okay. Now that we've created these, we can actually say that we have changed models in our environment, which is great because we can now use, for the first time, Python manage.py make migration. So here, I'm going to go here, Python manage.py make migrations. All right. Now this is going to create a special file. So you can say create model cat breed, create model piece, and this is going to create a special file 001 initial. This is essentially making a file that's going to apply those changes to the database. So now that we have them there and we're pretty happy with these tables so far, we can add some more information later on. I'm going to do Python manage.py migrate, and it's going to tell me I'm going to apply cats 01 initial. But you folks are thinking, Dan, how are we going to see these tables? How am I going to do that? I've got no idea. I'm so stressed out. That's totally fine. I'm going to get you calmed down. We are going to add them to the admin that we logged into earlier so that we can add data to it, which is really cool. Really kind of nice feature of Django. But again, just to reiterate, what are models? They are going to be one, when the actual definition of your models class with fields, that is going to be all of your fields. One model class is going to be essentially a database table, and you're going to use that class to interact with the database. So it's going to be cat.objects.get, cat.objects.filter, and that's going to add it. You can do cat.objects.create. I'm not going to go into too much detail on those today because that is a really large talk into itself, but I wanted to see that. So we have applied those migrations already, and we have seen that it's successful. We saw that, okay, we're ready to rock. But again, we need to be able to see this data, and we need to be able to add data to our project. So what I'm going to do here is you're going to see that there's admin, and there's nothing there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import from my models. So .models, that's saying I'm going to look in the current directory, the current init.py. I'm going to say from my current folder in the models pile, I'm going to import the cat and the cat breed model, which I can just do this as well, just to be able to show you. So I'm importing these two tables. And what we're going to do is we're essentially going to register them to the admin. So I'm going to do admin.site.register cat and the cat breed. As well, if you folks are thinking, Dan, what the heck are you doing with that def stir self? This is actually going to be the name of the object instance. I want to make it more explicit. So I want to say, hey, instead of giving me cat breed, XY, blah, 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 I just want you to say, hey, the current instance is just the name. And as well, for the cat, it's going to be the name and the cat breed, which is going to refer to this. Okay. So now that we have them registered to the admin, let's actually go take a look at what we're doing. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to uncomment the line for the session-based authentication. I know that that's really finicky, but there's not really a wonderful way to do this. But we are going to go make sure that our project is running. Once that is there, Python manage.py run server. Right. Now that's going to have our Django project running. So now what I could do is I could go back to my admin, and you could see before it had tokens, groups, users, but now I've actually the tables that are added to this admin so that we can add to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of cat breeds. One, we're going to do Siamese. I'm going to add loud, weird face. These are really official. I'm going to save and add another. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add farm cat, and we're going to write beige friendly. I don't know. We're just going to add. Okay. So now if I go to my cat breeds, you can see I've got a couple there, which is really great. But I want to add my own cats because I want them to be all-stars in the world of tech. So we're going to add some cats here. So I'm going to add Ghost. I'm going to say that he is a farm cat. I'm going to add, nope. I'm going to add Gambit, and he's going to be a farm cat. We're going to save and add another, and we're going to add Marshmallow here. And we're going to say that he's a Siamese cat. So now I've got 3 cats. We can say Marshmallow, he's a Siamese. Gambit, who is a farm cat, and Ghost, that is a farm cat. And I've got 2 cat breeds here. So now I have data in that table, which is really cool, right? This is kind of one of the powerful pieces of Django that gives it to you. Now, let's create a RESTful APIs. So what we need to do is we need to create a serializers.py file. So this is going to convert our Django models to something that's understandable by, or something that is JSON or XML. Most times you are going to do that. As well, if you're getting the detailed CSRF token failed, token missing, make sure that that's going to be this line. You comment it out if you're not accessing the admin. You are leaving it in if you're accessing the admin. Okay, so just a heads up, as if you are getting to that error, that's exactly what it is. If you forgot to save the file, don't worry. I've done that about 345 times. Okay, so in our cats folder, we want to create something that is going to essentially convert our model code to our JSON code, which, as I've kind of discussed, this is going to be the language that we use to be able to use it. So you understand me because I'm speaking English. This is how other computers understand, or other clients understand what I'm trying to relay for information there. So again, I'm running out of time, so of which normally this doesn't happen, but you know what? That's totally fine. Hopefully you folks are not too stressed out about it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to import the cat model. I'm going to say, okay, from this cat breed serializers, I'm going to inherit from the model serializer. This is going to convert all of my fields here to serializer fields. So essentially, character fields is essentially what we have. And that's going to be exactly what we use. So here I've got my fields. I'm going to add it. I've got name and description. It's going to change it to text fields. For this model, I've got a couple of fields. I've got a foreign key, so that's going to change to a number unless I change depth, which we can take a look at as well. And it's also going to have a name, which is pretty cool. So let's go ahead. I'm going to add that in. I really apologize for running out of time. So here, I'm going to create a serializers.py file. Just add that in. Now, again, you can see it should be in the same folder as your models because it is importing using the .models, relative imports. It's using it from the current folder. I want to import these two bad boys and use them, okay? And I want to use all of their fields. So these are going to be changed to essentially text fields, okay? As well, serializers do some validation when you do the post. You can clean the data, you can transform the data on save. But again, I want to get something that you folks can get up and running in a day here or in an hour, which is also very complicated and hard to do. So now that we have our models in the way that they can be translated to JSON, something that's understandable by other computers, you need to make it so that you have the functions, so the get, put, post, delete functions that you need to serve and you need to be able to do. So there is a model view set that's going to be in our views. Our model view set that's going to implement all of these functions based on our model view serializer. Now, again, you can go into detail a lot more about this if you want to learn more about how to edit these, how to change them. I want to give you the most flexibility as possible. And this is essentially all implemented in the model view set class, okay? But you need to give it a couple of things. One, the query set, which is essentially what you want to get from the database as you see it. So here, I'm going to go catbreed.objects.all, and this is essentially the first thing that you are going to see here. So to interact with the database. So here, what we're doing, we're going to import all of these, which, man, normally I'm way better at talking shorter. But we are going to import cat and cat breed from models. So we want to say, okay, get all of the cats using the ORM, which is this objects.all model, really special one. And that is going to be the query set, which is essentially going to be the results that I want from the database. Now, as well, since we're using a serializer, okay, we need to make it so that other computers can understand that. And we've got a serializer class that we're importing from serializers, which are going to convert our fields to something that is human readable, like JSON in our files, okay? So I've got that in our views, but I've got the functions now. I've got our models. I've got the translation of our models to something that's readable so that we can serve it in our functions. But the last thing that I need here is I need to add it to our URLs, right? So we need to hook this all up to our URLs. And I'm going to talk about these pieces as we go forward. So I've got my cats here. Boom, we're going to add it to the urls.py. Okay, so what do I have here? I've got my REST framework. I'm going to import routers. Okay, now this is going to make all of the endpoints that are get, put, post, delete endpoints to our view set. And we're just about to see where we can see them on our application. But we need to register the view set, which is going to be the cat breed view set, which we have just created, and the cat view set, which we just created. Okay, so this is going to be here. I'm going to write cat and cat breeds, and these are going to be the URLs, but we don't have them hooked up to our project yet. So let's go ahead and let's hook them up to our project. So I'm going to use path v1/catapp, and we are going to include our project here. How do we include it? Well, we use include, which we included earlier. So here, we're going to include it. So it's here. We're just going to include cats.urls. The path, not to be confused with the path, which I'm not going to tell you what that is, but it does something special. I'm kidding. It doesn't do anything special. Okay. So let's go see what we actually just did. So now that we have it, Django URLs, cats.urls does not appear to have any patterns on it. Okay, so now if we go, am I unmuted now? I think I muted myself. There we go. So now if we go to our localhost and make sure that your server is running, you could go v1/catapp, and it's going to say, hey, you've got a couple of things here. You've got your cats, which you could create it. So we actually have a RESTful API working. Woo! So this is going to have the actual link to the cat breed. We can show the nesting. I'm going to show that at the end, in case there are people that are there that are interested in doing that. And we have cat breeds as well. And that's going to show loud, weird face. Now that is my, that is one of my cats. And you can see here the actual cat breeds there, which is really fantastic. So you could give yourself a self high five. You have essentially created a RESTful API, but we should kind of like add some more things and go explore a little bit more. So again, comment out this line, or you can remove it now if you'd like. And what we can do is we can actually add another cat here, and we can add things to our database by using a RESTful API. So I'm going to go to my serializers. I'm going to remove that line. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this REST client. And what I can do is I could go localhost 8000 v1 catapp/cats. Always add a trailing piece here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another cat. Okay. I'm going to write that the name is going to be egg roll. And we can add a breed here. And I'm just going to write 1. And hopefully post. and you need to add the HTTP in front of it. We're going to send it, and we're going to see here that I've got a preview here, unsupported text in request. Now, why am I coming into that? I need to add a custom header. Now, what is the custom header? The content type is equal to JSON because that's how we're sending information to it. All right, so it's totally fine if you get that, but now we should be able to have that. So I've actually misnamed it here. That's fine. But you can see that it's created a cat breed with egg roll. The cat breed is null. We can change that later on if we really want. Here. That's fine. Oh, that's a post. So we can just kind of get that. Okay. So that's fantastic. That's done. Now I've probably got just a few more minutes here. But what you want to do is you want to add your API and you want to make it private so that people can't access it and they need to use a URL to be able to do this. Well, what you could do is you can import permissions from Django REST framework. You could have is authenticated, is staff. So if it is a super user, and there's just a lot of different permissions, you can actually create your own permissions. So you can see, you know, if he logs in on Wednesdays between 2 and 3 p.m., you could make it that specific on the permissions to be able to add it. But what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add these two things to our view set. And this is essentially going to make it private. So here I'm going to import permissions. And then on my cat view set, because I don't want everybody to know my cat's names, contrary to what I said earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the permissions is authenticated. And now this is only going to show up if the user is authenticated. Does the admin route use the get to display the data? Yes, but it's a little bit different because it uses templates rather than an API to be able to do so, Sunil. Hopefully that answers that question. Make sure that the session authentication is done. All right. Now, what you're going to see here is when I go to my cat app cats, it's going to show you a couple things. So I'm going to get them and see if I can have it. So I'm going to remove this body, but you're going to see here that it says authentication credentials were not provided. So how do you add those authentication credentials? Well, we made it loginable, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my auth token and I want to add my user that I've created. So this is going to be username is Dan. Yo, and the password is mysupercoolpassword.com. I'm kidding. The password is temp. And make sure that you have a comma. Right? Now, what you're going to do here, method get not allowed. You have to post to this. So you're going to get a token here. Now, this is really important because this is going to trip you up if you don't have it. So now I want you to copy this token that you've created earlier. All right. And here, when you go to your cat app /cats, it's going to say, hey, you have not provided the authentication credentials. So what you're going to do here, and you're going to remove this body, what you're going to do here is you're going to add a custom header, and that custom header, which we have already added, okay, we're going to add authorization, and in the attribute value, this is going to trip a lot of people up. We're going to add token and then space the token value. Now, this is where you can change the types of token. You can use a JSON web token. You can use an OAuth token, but this is how you authenticate across those things. So what we're going to do is now we're going to send it, and it's going to say that we don't have it. Oh, authorization. Sorry. name. Now we're getting the information. Now you can see here that we can see all of our information with our authorization head token, right? So authorization token value, and we know the content type is JSON, which is fantastic. You've created your first authenticated RESTful API, which is great. And the entire file should essentially look like that. You can add your custom permissions as you kind of go along, which is really, really neat. And again, you can access this from this project once you kind of deploy it, or you kind of put it behind something like ngrok. Okay, you can go and access it from anywhere because you've gotten your cores to be able to say, hey, I want to allow it from anywhere. You've got it authenticated. You have, I'm not going to go over this because I'm running out of time, but you can register users with your Joser installed. So that's great. You can add email, username, just kind of going through there. But essentially, what have we done so far? We've created a full end-to-end, one, authentication to a RESTful API, and two, we've actually created an application in Django. We have added models to it. Okay. We have essentially serialized those models so that information from our database so that it's understandable by other computers. And you can see here that's understandable even by a REST client. That's kind of formatting it really nicely. We have added the view sets so that the get, put, post, delete for creating new cats, adding new cats. Now these can change to whatever models you want to do. Those methods are there and implemented for you. And you've hooked up to the URLs by using the Django REST Framework router, which is doing some of those methods for you. And you have added it to the admin so that you can actually add those items. And we have logged in with a token to be able to see your authenticated API. Okay, as well, that kind of comes to the conclusion of what I'm talking about. My apologies if I did go quickly. This is why I have the full article of where I've gone through today, as well as information to go through on all of the specific topics that you want to go and explore. And if you're interested in learning more about Django, because I know that Django is a very large framework that I tried to explain in an hour, which again is very foolish on my part, but you know what? You got to swing and you got to miss. So you can take a look at the Django Girls tutorial, which is going to talk about how Django functions as a whole. Now, again, some extras that I will be adding to this repository is how to consume our API using JavaScript, deploying it to Heroku, and adding data using management commands to be able to do that. But just wanted to tell you folks, you're awesome. This is really exciting when you get this to work the first time. I remember when I got my first RESTful API working, I was like, woo, this is so cool. As well, there is a Steve Ballmer link there if you folks are done. But thanks, folks. That is about 20 minutes longer than I have done that. Can Django integrate with Bootstrap libraries? So yeah, you can do, it's kind of a weird way of writing it. And I'm not saying that it's not the correct question, but Bootstrap is more on the front end. You can just use it in your templates if you want to go it that way. This kind of method of doing it with our Django project, the method that we've created it, you can make it so that it integrates with React, and you can use Bootstrap and React. You could do it in Vue if you wanted to do it that way. You could do it in so many different ways to be able to kind of use Bootstrap. But that is more of kind of like the client end. So as long as it works with your JavaScript, it does it there. Does the admin root also use get to be able to display the data? Yes, it uses the same mechanisms. It's just a little bit different in the way that it's using a template to render that data. If you want to learn more about Django templates and context and how that all works, you can go take a look at the Django Girls tutorial. They killed it with how to explain it really well. This is more of how to create a RESTful API with Django there. So Sergey has a question. Maybe I'm getting this wrong. If you want to create IoT projects and manipulate it from your phone, you need to create a RESTful API. There's a lot of different ways to be able to interact with IoT, with stuff like WebSockets and other kind of protocols. RESTful APIs is one of them. But again, it's a little bit challenging. You need to, it kind of adds an extra layer of complication. You need to essentially be able to access the device to be able to kind of like control it. But there's stuff like the AWS IoT cloud, as well as the Google IoT cloud that you can go and have access to be able to do that. That's kind of like a long piece here. Now, if you want to shortcut this and you don't want to do this, what you could do is you can get ngrok on your Raspberry Pi, register that with a Django project, but really take a look at ngrok because it's going to make it kind of like a public API to be able to do that. So Sergey, hopefully that does answer your question and helps a little bit. Does anybody else have any other questions that I can ask in the next 4 minutes so that I don't impede on Franklin's time here?
Hey, Dan, I would like to interrupt a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So basically, thanks a lot for this wonderful talk. And I would like to emphasize that I understand this course material could be a little bit in depth for today's content, but our goal is to give you insight of how the industrial web development looks like. So that's why we have the full detailed resources and all the documentation, source code for you to explore afterwards. So if you have any difficulties today, definitely take a look at the recordings after I post them in a couple of days, and then go through the entire materials. And also, if you have any questions regarding to how to set up the virtual environment and stuff, do make sure to check out the last week's content that I provided. So there will be some setting up there. So if you still have any questions, feel free to ask in the channel, in the Slack channel. And also, I suggest the steps to go through today's material is that first, get your course material downloaded to your local computer. Second, get your virtual environment working and install all the packages. Third, have your command line working to spin up the product and then follow all the course content. So only by doing that and do the hands-on job, you will have experience on how to do this stuff. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask us or do a simple Google search, because this material should be very basic and fundamental. Also, although I understand this is a limited short time, it's pretty difficult to absorb all the concepts and stuff, but that's why we have all the course material and recordings posted afterwards. So yeah, thanks a lot. And maybe we can go back to the questions.
Yeah, as well, and kind of to build on that, thank you so much for that, Carson. This stuff doesn't, like, I'm trying to get you folks to do something relatively complicated in an hour. And one, if you got this working, this is really exciting, but don't get discouraged if you didn't get it working yet. You can go through, you can refer to the docs, you can ask me. I'm going to be on the Pi Bootcamp Slack. So you can say, hey, Dan, can you help me with this? I know that a few of you, I've helped out looking at it beforehand. But again, this is kind of the exciting piece there to add. So it looks like Peter answered that question. Are there any other questions regarding this that we can go into before we pass it off? All right, folks. I'm going to pass it off to Xin-Li, but I'm going to do a shameless plug here. Tomorrow is the Edmonton Python Meetup, which I totally forgot on my introduction. I did afterwards, thanks to Xin-Li. But definitely join if you folks want to do a little bit of hands-on coding, meet a lot of friends that are pretty kind of nice people. As you folks know, I'm going to be there. So you can be there or be square. Just kidding. Yeah. Thanks, folks.
And also Frank, Dan, me, and Peter, who's the and Keegan, we are all web devs, so feel free to ask us any questions regarding to that. And also, I use Windows at my personal computer to do web development and also do machine learning stuff. So feel free to ask us any web dev related questions.
Yep.
And our GDG leaders, Xin-Li and Lei and me, and also the Week 4 instructors are all familiar with machine learning and data science stuff. So just feel free to ask us these questions.
Yeah, huge shout out to everybody helping out during this presentation. So that's great. Thanks for that, Carson. And I do thank you. So thank you. And thank you for listening. Hopefully you got enough of my blabbing. So should we pass it to Xin-Li? Are we going to be taking a break at 2:30 here? 1:30? 2:30?
Sure, yeah. I think we should take a break for 10 minutes and be back at 2:40. And frankly, we'll start. But between that, if you have more to communicate or anyone in the class who has a question, please don't feel free to open your mic, unmute your mic, and ask them directly. So we will not play music. Sorry about that.
I could sing. I mean, I know that is like people that have been in my class have told me that I've got the voice of Sarah McLachlan. So again.
Well, if you don't mind, yeah.
Silent night. That's too much.
That
People
is
are
great.
like, no. You're like, no, don't do it, Dan.
But also, I want to say thank you so much, Dan. I think that's a really, really good hands-on tutorial about the kind of like fundamental, but not yet so fundamental class on the web development use RESTful API. I think actually took one during my master's. I took one web development course, but I think this is actually more. I think for people who is not super familiar, but later once you have some experience, you go back and say this is actually more useful and more related to your day-to-day jobs.
Yeah, thank you. It's totally it's hard to kind of teach to all of the different audiences, but I tried to make it accessible to most and give you. If you just want to copy paste and go through it, if you want to go through and see all of the details, I try to not keep anything behind the curtain and give you links directly to the documentation that you can go see. As well, I am a contributor to Python or Django simple JWT. So I know a little bit, a couple of things when it comes to JSON Web Tokens and integrating it with Joser. So definitely ask me questions about that. I am more than excited. And as well, folks, it's totally fine if you didn't keep up. Don't kind of think that you should have. I kind of was running out of time, so don't feel bad if the instructor can't keep up as well. So, but again, thank you again so much, folks. And I'm excited to hear all about API Star. FastAPI, not API Star. Sorry, that's another framework.
That's great. I really wish in the future we have some opportunities to do this again. And I know you from the Edmonton Pi meetup, you guys have some really great Python developers and resources. And maybe for next time we can have just a few weeks of bootcamp just for web development using Python, because I think that's definitely 1.5 hours. It's not 11. It's kind of a teaser, but if we have more time and opportunities and can find those course leaders who are having time and will like to giving back to our community, our developers community, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that would be a fantastic here. Is there anyone here who uses Flask? Flask is actually really cool. It's a little bit more bare bones than Django. So you kind of have to use this. You're going to see that a lot in the machine learning field. People really like to create their pipelines with Flask to be able to do this. But again, folks, one thing that I definitely will say about with Xinli is that this is fantastic. And if you folks really like some of these things, don't only show up to the bootcamp, go to the events, go to GDG Edmonton events, go to Pi YYC events, go to Edmonton Pi events. There's so many awesome talks all the time that, you know, that's the reason why we do this. And we like giving back. And if you are thinking about giving back, you folks do have enough experience to give a talk, even if it's just a preliminary talk of something that you know in Python, and it would really help everyone in the community, and also put your name out there if you're thinking about making a move to the field. Sort of just keep on blabbing here. I'm just scatterbrained, motor mouth.
That's actually one thing I would like to focus as well. So like the quickest way to learn is by teaching. So that's why you should also join any of the meetups like the Pi YYC or Edmonton Pi. I was in Edmonton and I met Dan at the Edmonton Pi along with a few other fantastic friends. So, and I learned a lot from Edmonton Pi. I did a few presentations at Edmonton Pi, also the AI meetups. And I came to Calgary. I took over the leadership job for the Pi YYC, and I started organizing the Pi YYC, the Calgary Python meetup. So I also presented there. I help people. I post job postings, opportunities, everything. So no matter what your experience is, like either beginner or advanced, expert, always feel free to share. Like if you have experience, share it. If you don't, learn it, share it, and then you should be able to learn that in a really solid way.
And one thing that I definitely will say as well is you get friends that are very interested in the same things that you are, which is always fun. So I know that I've gotten some good friends like Carson amongst other developers that have come to the meetup. And now that we're in different cities, one, it's a little sad, but two, we kind of expand our whole connection network of friends in different cities.
Yep, exactly. That's a very good benefit from that. And I do miss your cats, Dan. I think ghosts love me.
Oh, I need to find them. Okay, I'm gonna go. Oh, but I'll probably let folks kind of breathe for a bit before we start with Franklin. Xinli, is there a time that we're coming back? 2:43, 2:45, 2:40?
Yeah, 2:42. Let's see. Yep.
All right.
And again, feel free to share or show your cat.
Okay, I will go grab them. I'm just going to go run and get it.
And also folks who probably took both of our boot camps, our previous machine learning boot camp with Calgary Data Science Academy, and our current boot camp with PyYC. So we were going to create a survey and send it to you guys, whoever attend our boot camps before, just kind of to get an idea about to gathering some ideas to see for next year what kind of courses, what kind of course format we're going to make change or going to plan. For us is we want to organize some courses that are interest of us, but also interest of the participant. So when you see us the email when we send the survey, please fill that out. That's gonna greatly help us to come up courses, put up different resources and course leaders together to form a really strong team and different boot camps. Ooh, so cute.
You want to say hi, buddy? Can you folks see him? Yeah, he's
Yep.
so cute.
Is that he or she? I think it's a little bit shy.
He's Marshmallow's a he. He's a big noodle. And he's not the smartest, but he's a cute little guy. He's super chill. Oh, there you go. Is that right, Marshmallow? Oh, you're not the smartest little guy.
Well, don't say that. Maybe you can understand.
I know. But yeah, he's super floopy. And he's very long. You're so patient. You're so patient.
That is great.
Okay. Awesome.
So, Frank, are you ready?
Sure.
Cool. I'll hand over to you now.
All right. Let's see how this goes.
So in the middle, share screen.
Yeah. Oh no. Here, I have to. I should have tried this before. I just have to give it permission, which means I have to restart. I'll be back in a sec. Sorry.
No. Is there something that on my end?
No. Just Mac permissions.
Oh, I see. Take your time.
Dan, there's a question in the chat is asking for the Edmonton Python meetup link. Can you send that in the chat?
That is great. So normally we have most of our information here, but we don't have that yet. I will update that shortly. Unfortunately, working with others, the meetup.com normally is here. So either on the Edmonton Pi site, which we will have that done. Hopefully today I'll actually send a message because someone that should have been done. Or right here, I will add a comment about the link to it. So I'm gonna make sure that we try to get it by the end of this meetup. We normally use something called Remo. I will also send a link to it on the Bootcamp Slack as well. Thank you so much for that question.
Cool. I got an enthusiastic thumbs up, which leads me to believe things are maybe working. Do they look like they're working?
I think so. You're sharing
Perfect.
your screen, right?
Wonderful. Yeah, great. So, all right, I'm gonna get into it then. I guess a quick introduction. My name's Franklin. My background's in geology and geophysics, but I've been developing in Python for 5 years or so, writing REST APIs and Python clients. Yeah, and I work for a company called Sequent, which, yeah, just gonna leave it at that. So yeah, for an outline here, I'm gonna start by kind of stepping back from the API code and going through a few more basics that weren't covered in weeks 1 and 2 that are kind of necessary for the code that I'm writing later to make sense. So I'll go through these pretty quickly because they're not the focus of the presentation. The FastAPI stuff is the focus, but I'll try to at least give somewhat of an overview. And then I'm going to jump into my PowerPoint and talk a little bit about microservices, just what they are and why use them or why not use them. And then I'm going to do some FastAPI coding, somewhat similar to Dan's presentation. And then, yeah, so this presentation is available on the GitHub repository that you guys should have access to. So yeah, the slides are available there. And then I also, yeah, rather than having a bunch of links, I kind of have these little things to Google. And I vetted all of these to make sure that like the first few results were actually relevant. And so yeah, if you want to know more about Sequent, you can Google Sequent. Cool. Let's see. Here we go. So the first thing I want to talk about is declarative code. Yeah, so this is more of like kind of just an approach for writing your code. And it's really writing your code in a way that you can see what it does, not how it does it. And so if you write declarative code, it's easier to read and write. And it really exposes a nice, clear interface. I'll give some examples in a minute. Just so you have an idea what I'm talking about. And of course, yeah, you can Google declarative programming. You'll get all sorts of opinions on declarative programming, and there are some languages that are designed for this. Yeah. Oh, okay. Before I talk about declarative programming in Python, one reason I like talking about declarative programming right off the bat when it's actually a talk about APIs is because when you're building an API, you're really building an interface. So this is kind of the one thing I want to add to what Dan said about REST APIs. Is the critical thing about a REST API is that it has a clean, well-documented interface that has like very explicit inputs and outputs, and you know what it does. And as long as you build an API with that, then it can do whatever you want under the hood, and users will still be able to pick it up and start using it. So since the end goal is to be building API code that's very clear, if we start by making the code that actually runs that API declarative, then it's kind of a good start. Yeah, so I'll I don't know, hopefully when I actually show some code, it'll be a little more apparent what I mean. So in Python, declarative code isn't really the default. And there's a couple ways that you can make your code more declarative. One way in the standard library is data classes. And the sort of gold standard, in my opinion, is using a library called Pydantic. Awesome. So now I'm going to jump over and kind of show what these are, which will hopefully be yeah, a little bit more descriptive than a PowerPoint presentation. I should also mention, so this is just in a notebook. I did put this on Google Colab. I could actually probably send the link in chat. Hopefully this works here. I think my chat window stayed over here. Cool. So this notebook is in the GitHub repository. It's also on Google Colab on that link I just shared. Yep, I'm going to zip through this a little bit quickly, probably. So maybe, yeah, it's maybe a good thing to go look back and convince yourself separately of the things that I'm saying. But if you start out, okay, so if we start out with just sort of basic Python, as we learned in the first 2 courses, we want to create this class called hockey pool entry, because I have this clever idea for a hockey pool, because I'm not very creative, and yeah, got that idea when I was watching the presentation last week. And so for this hockey pool entry, I have an idea of what I want it to be. I want it to have a name, some teams, and a prediction. We should probably make that prediction. But then the only way to say what these are to start with is just some documentation strings. So, okay, it's documented name is just the username, teams. Oh, that's a list of 3 choices of teams, prediction total goals at the end of the season. And okay, cool. So this is the object that I created, and we can instantiate it in a way that we would predict, where I pass a sensible name and some actual teams and a prediction that's a number. But since it's Python, you can kind of do anything. Like I didn't actually declare what any of these are. So we can also just make another totally valid hockey pool entry with just totally bogus items for each of these. Okay, so we don't really want to be able to create these totally bogus entries. So we can add some validation, and this, like, I don't know, I just kind of wrote a bunch of code here to validate stuff. So there's a function that validates the name, validates the teams, validates the prediction. That's just a lot of code, a lot of if statements. And then you can see when you assign each of these in there, you get that validation. And so now with that validation added, you actually get some errors when you try and create this totally bogus hockey pool entry. But going back to the thing that I was talking about in the PowerPoint presentation with declarative code, I wouldn't consider this declarative at all. In order to understand what this does, you have to go line by line, and well, you can read the doc string and you can trust the doc string, or you can just go line by line and read the code to see every bit. Okay, if teams isn't an instance of a list, okay, so teams needs to be a list, it has to be a link 3, kind of go through line by line, and that's fine, it works, but it's also not super easy to look at. It's also a lot of lines of code as the person maintaining it. Okay, so then in Python 3.7, I think.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you make it just
please
like a tiny
bit
bigger?
Absolutely. I can make it a lot bigger.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I made my other windows bigger, but not this one. Let's see. There we go.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And yeah, feel free to interrupt with any questions or anything. I'll try to keep an eye on chat as well, but I don't mind at all being interrupted. Okay, so this was added in Python 3.7. It's called data classes. And this is a way that you can kind of declare what's in your class actually in the code. And so now we've created this thing that's a data class, and this little @ thing here, I don't think it's been talked about at all. So I will get to that in a little bit. Right now, don't really worry about it. This is just turning this hockey pool entry into a data class. And now, rather than having a doc string to specify everything, we can declare what each of these things are. Name is a string, teams is a list of strings, prediction is an integer. And these are using Python type annotations, which I do think were talked about last week. So I'm not going to talk too much about those here. Yeah, cool. So now we've gone from, just scrolling up, we've gone from this thing here, which has name, teams, prediction buried in the init file and the types documented just in the doc string, to something a little bit better, where we don't need that init method anymore. That's one of the nice things about data class. But when you declare these fields, it creates an init a lot like the one that I had above. And this says what the types are. So we can create our hockey pool entry from there. And yep, that still works. However, something about data classes to keep in mind is that there isn't actually any validation as to what these are. So there is validation if you run something to check the types, but just when you're writing, if you don't check the types, there's, oh, hey, name must be a string. Well, look at that. Maybe there is validation. I'm confused why that happened. Oh, because data class is not defined. I didn't actually run these blocks of code. So there we go. So now data class. So now I have this new hockey pool entry. Now we're creating a new hockey pool entry. So this is this new thing. This is also quite nice here. The string printout is nicer. But the point I was trying to make a few seconds ago is that you can also create a totally invalid hockey pool entry still, because these types aren't validated at all. Keeping on charging down this notebook here. So now you can add additional validation, but it's now we just took this nice declarative way of defining hockey pool entry and then shoved a bunch of code to validate what each of these things are. So this actually checks that things are strings and lists and everything else. So just to go through here, it does in fact fail when you try to create this invalid hockey pool entry, but it fails because of some magic, not magic, but pretty explicit, not very declarative stuff here. Cool, so then Pydantic solves this problem quite nicely. So Pydantic looks quite similar to the data class. So if we compare this here to our basic data class, we say it's a data class, and then we have name, teams, prediction. Pydantic does the same thing, except here we're saying it's a Pydantic base model. Name, teams, prediction just uses type annotations, but Pydantic actually validates these type annotations. So with just these 6 lines of code, this invalid entry fails, and it fails with a really nice error. It says, okay, value for teams is not a valid list. And then, I don't know, we can get a little bit deeper. I know I'm going through this quickly, but it's a notebook that everyone should have access to, so you can go through it yourself as well. It's not perfect because prediction, we just said is an integer, but maybe we don't want that prediction to be negative. So a negative prediction is still fine, an empty list of teams is fine. But Pydantic gives you tools to declare even more validation around this. So now we've created this base model. As a name, it says it's a string. Teams is a list of strings still, but we also say that it has to have at least 3 items and at most 3 items, which means it can only have 3 items. And then here for prediction, we can say that we want it to be greater than or equal to 0. Another nice thing here is that we just made the description no longer just little comments in my code, but they're actually part of the class itself. So now this teams field has a description. All of them have descriptions. And now my invalid hockey pool entry here doesn't work, or still works because I didn't actually run this block. But then when I run that block and redefine hockey pool entry, yeah, we get this validation error. It says, okay, teams needs 3 items, prediction needs to be greater than or equal to 0.
What do those triple dots do?
So the triple dots, yeah. So that's a this is a valid thing in Python that is it's usually just used for kind of funny little things. And so in the field class, if you look at what field is, it takes a bunch of stuff. So the first value is the default value. So if you want to set a default here, you can say default name. If you want name to be optional, so you can create a valid hockey pool entry that doesn't have a name, then you can say none here. There's no default and it's not required. If you don't want to provide a default, but it is required, then you just use these 3 dots. And so like what those 3 dots actually are is probably something that's better to Google. I don't really like, I've only seen them used in kind of funny cases. Like you can, if you want, you can make a class that's like blah. And then if you don't know what to write here, you can just give 3 dots and that'll be a valid class. Yeah, it does something. It is an operation, but I've only ever seen it used for just like little kind of funny things like this. So hopefully that's helpful. In this case, it means that the field is required. Okay, and just for this last thing, so now our valid hockey pool entry is still valid, and that's quite nice. So I'll come back to this, but gonna set it aside for now and talk quick about decorators. I guess I'm gonna go back to my presentation because I think I have a slide or 2 in here, even though I don't think it's super useful. Yeah, so decorators feel kind of like magic. You should Google them. I'm going to give a very, very, very brief demo, but I think that we could have a whole 3-hour course on decorators to understand how they work. But basically, they just operate on a function or a class to give it some new behavior. And then the @ syntax is kind of another nice declarative thing. So I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. Really though, if you have more questions about this should just come, you should just like come and follow up on Slack. Cool. So yeah, quickly here. So the decorator that we saw before was the data class decorator. So it was like this thing here. And so to explain what that's doing, what we can do is we can first create a class that's just everything here that doesn't include the decorator. And then we can look at what that is. Hockey pool undecorated. Cool. So that's just this class. You can instantiate it here. Oh, you can't. Okay, you can't instantiate it there because what you did is just like, doesn't actually make any sense. In like default Python, these mean nothing. And so you just created a class with some stuff that Python doesn't really understand. Like if you look here at, I don't know, this is maybe too dicey to get into, but there's this method called dict that's on every object that shows what's inside it. And so if you look at what's in dict, these things that you declared are under annotations, but they don't exist anywhere else. So what you did is you just like created this class that has these annotations in it somewhere, but it doesn't actually do anything with them. And so it's, I mean, it's like totally broken. It just doesn't work. Yep. Cool. But then when you decorate it with this decorator, it does work. And so that decorator does some sort of magic to the class that makes it from this totally useless thing into a not so useless thing. And just to kind of give a really quick idea of how that happens. And so you can remember everything in Python is an object, including classes and functions. So look, the undecorated hockey pool entry class is in fact an object, which means you can use it as a value in a function. So here we can just call data class as a function on this class, and it creates this new hockey pool entry decorated. And this is another thing that works. And so really, this is all you're doing when you do this at data class. You're just calling data class on the thing below it. Yeah, I'm going to stop there because this is like a total rabbit hole. And I have a strong suspicion that this part of my demo did not make much sense at all. But really, the important thing, like all you need to understand for the actual API part of this is that when you have a decorator on here, it just does something with the thing below it to change the behavior of the thing below it. All right. Cool. And yeah, please follow up on Slack. I think decorators are really cool and you can do some wild stuff with them, but yeah, not the point of this talk. Okay. Cool. So the next thing, yes, this is now in a whirlwind class of covering all sorts of different stuff. We're going to take a total left turn to concurrency and parallelism and talk about that for a tiny bit. Again, this is like a really nice thing to Google and learn more about, because there's no way you're going to get all you need to know out of what I'm saying right now. But basically, concurrency and parallelism, that's doing lots of stuff at the same time. Yeah, Google it, please, please, please. And so some examples of the sorts of things that come out of this. So if you have some really slow operations, maybe you want to create a responsive user interface while other stuff is going on in the background, or you have some intense computation you want to do, or maybe a bunch of repetitive tasks. Like maybe there's some task that requires, it runs for 24 hours and you want to do it 1,000 times. If you can do those all simultaneously, then that's quite nice rather than waiting a few years. Cool. And I guess in my mind, these are kind of split down this line here. So parallelism, this is for things that are CPU bound, which means they're like very computationally heavy. And so in order to run two computationally intensive tasks at the same time, you basically need 2 CPUs doing the work. And so this like gets into the hardware you're using. And if you need to share memory between those 2 CPUs, it's quite a complex problem, I guess I'll say. Yeah, and so this is not the part I'm going to talk about. So for this, there's difficulties doing this in Python because of the global interpreter lock, which is just a thing to Google, and I'm not even going to start talking about it because I would, I would put my foot in my mouth, I'm sure. Dask is a popular library for running tasks in parallel in Python. So if that's something that is exciting to you, those are things you can Google. Concurrency, though, is what I'm going to talk about because this is what matters for microservices. So this is when something is slow, but it's slow because of inputs and outputs. And so this would be like HTTP requests. If you're just sitting and waiting for a response to come back, then like your computer actually isn't doing anything. It's just like waiting for whatever servers to come up with an answer. And if it's a slow server, that could take a second, which if you're making 1,000 of those requests, that's going to add up. That's also the same thing with like responsive user interfaces, is like a user clicking is kind of this sort of slow, unpredictable thing that it's nice to just like be able to keep that responsive while you're doing other stuff in the background. Cool. So then concurrency in Python. So very cool in Python, one of these Python 3s, 3.5 maybe, async IO became part of the standard library. Google it, yep, great thing to Google. Yeah, and so like kind of on first glance, it's quite easy. Like there's just these pieces of syntax you can add to make your program async. You can just add async and await keywords. But actually it's not that easy, of course, because once you start doing that, then you start introducing coroutines, which are like objects that will return when you wait for them to return, but haven't returned yet. Yeah, so I don't know, I'm gonna go into an example here to hopefully kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. And like the example that I'm about to show you is even more complex than, well, it's not very complex, but it's more complex than what we need when we get to FastAPI. Cool. So for this one, I'm going to go in here. And yeah, I'm also using Sublime. I don't know, I was gonna make that same joke about Vim because I thought that would be funny, but that's going to take more time than I want to spend being funny. Cool. So yeah, so let's see. What I have here is this like kind of silly thing. We have a function that gets my GitHub page. And then we have a function that runs this 10 times. So it creates a request session and then just fetches the same page 10 times. Does that 10 times in a row. So if we run this code, oh man, I don't know if I want to get into that. Yeah, let's do it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just running fetch 10 times, and I'm also timing it. So I'm getting the time before it starts, and then I'm printing the time when it's done. This name equals main thing is a common thing you'll see in Python files that just lets you run the file. I don't know, I will show you. And I feel like I'm just opening a million cans of worms of questions that are probably causing trouble in the comments, but here goes. So here we can just say Python. So right now I'm in just a terminal window in the same directory as this. So you can see, I don't know, this is kind of small over here, but this is the directory I'm in. So I'm in the same directory as this file. Yep, let's see, just see what happens. Python async demo. Cool. So that's because I'm not in the right environment. I like to use Conda. So I guess I could create a Conda environment right now. I think for all of this, it's probably okay if you just piggyback off the same environment that you might have created during Dan's talk. But just for the sake of maybe interest, I'll show you how to create a Conda environment. So this is assuming you have Conda installed. So I'm just going to create an environment here. I'm going to call it Bootcamp 3.8, and I want Python 3.8. So this will maybe do its thing. Proceed. Cool. And then I'm going to activate that Conda, activate Bootcamp 3.8. Great. And then one more thing we need to do is make it so we don't get the, so I mean, the first thing we did was got some import errors because we didn't have everything installed. And so I have this convenient requirements file, which is just a list of Python packages. And so I could just go through and install each of those. I could say pip install AIO HTTP. I could do each of those one at a time. Yep. Or you can also just install from a file. So I can say pip install -r. That says, okay, I want to install from a requirements file and give it the requirements file. And that just goes through and installs everything that I had listed in that file. Cool. Okay, doing great. So now let's go back and run this again. Super. Cool. So this went and fetched my GitHub repository 10 times, each time printed the status code, and then at the end printed the time. So yeah, this little block here, this basically says only run what's inside here if you're running this file directly. So if you import this file within a module, this code won't run. I guess I probably don't actually need it. That's more confusing. Anyway, yeah, if you import this code within a module, the name won't be main, the name will be whatever the name of the module is. And so it won't run this, but if you just run it directly, then it will run these things. So that's all that this is doing. It's just starting the time, fetching 10 times, and printing the elapsed time. And so the elapsed time there was like 2.3 seconds. Cool. And then to make this into async code, I already have it down here, but yeah, I think I'll just change it up here just to kind of show you what I'm doing. So this first function is pretty straightforward. You can just add the async await keywords. So if you put async def in front of your function, it now lets you await things inside it. And so await basically means wait for this thing to return. And then when we fetch 10 times, in order to use these async functions, you have to call from an async function. So we can just add our async keyword there. We need to use a different requests library because requests, which is being used here, doesn't actually support async calls. And so we have to switch to using AIO HTTP. But we're basically doing the same thing. This session can still just call get. We need to make some changes here since we're using a different session type. The status just comes in .status instead of status code. These are all kind of small changes. Okay, and then, yeah, cool. What other changes do we need to make? So maybe we can just, what's gonna happen if I run this here? Let's try this. So I'm also gonna add an await here because session.close is an async function. And I'm also gonna comment out this code just so it's not in front of everyone. And so I think if I run this again, what I hope to see is that since we never actually wait for this response, we never see it actually print the response status. So we'll see if that's true. Cool, yeah, perfect. So perfect enough. So this isn't happy because we never awaited anything. Okay, so this is saying we never awaited fetch 10 times. So that makes sense because right now we're just calling fetch 10 times as a function. We actually need to use async IO to run it. So now when we tell async IO to run it, it does await fetch 10 times. Great. And so now it's not happy because fetch was never awaited. And so each of these fetches was never awaited. And so, okay, so what we could do here is we could say, await, await. And then, I mean, we could do, yeah, await. Okay, so we could do that. Let's see what happens with that. Cool, so now it's working, supposedly. There it goes. But it's not actually any faster. And so this is kind of where the somewhat dicey stuff with async comes into play. It's because right now, even though we're using all these nice async keywords, we're actually still doing it sequentially. We're waiting for this one, then we're waiting for this one, then we're waiting for this one. So it doesn't actually take advantage of the async stuff. So then we have to use a different call here. We say async io.gather. And so now we gather each of these, and then we need to get rid of, whoop, do that, okay. Get rid of those again. And so we can use async IO to gather all of those, and then when we actually run it, it should, as long as we await for the result, it should run them all at the same time. Just make sure yeah, I think that's all right. So let's see what happens. Cool, great. So yeah, that happened faster, not like amazingly faster. There, that one was a lot faster. So now we're talking like less than a second instead of a little more than 2 seconds. Cool. Yeah. So that's my demo there. I don't know if that's a very good demo. It's just kind of like, it just kind of shows how you go from standard Python to async Python. So you have to add these keywords, but then you have to do a little bit of monkeying with awaiting things appropriately. Cool. Great. So yeah, I'm going to stop there again with that, because when we get to FastAPI, you will find that a lot of the details there don't actually matter. Does it necessitate that we should have multi-threading enabled processors? I don't think it requires that because it's not actually creating threads. It's just it's just waiting and letting other stuff happen in the background while it's waiting. So two things don't ever actually happen at the same time. It's just the async IO library, or the AIO HTTP library, I guess, the one making the HTTP requests. It just gives up control while it's waiting for that request to come back. If that makes sense. Cool. And yeah, I will just say again, I'm more than happy to answer any more questions about this in Slack, but I'm going to move on now so I don't totally run out of time for the FastAPI stuff and microservices. Cool. Okay, so this is going to be just in my PowerPoint a little bit. So what is a microservices architecture? What does that even mean? Yeah, you can Google it. That's probably the first thing you should do, even before you listen to me talk, but you probably don't have time, so I'm just going to start talking. So the idea here is that you have a bunch of loosely coupled services. And so that means that these services are created on their own, and the coupling between them is just through their APIs. And so yeah, it's like through those clear interfaces that are created. And so each of these services has a single responsibility, and then they talk through their interfaces. And so by building your architecture this way, it's really great as you scale and as your sort of what you're building scales, because if you keep each piece of what you're doing totally independent, then that means they can be independently developed. So you can have a team that's an expert on one service that doesn't know anything about the other service. They can be independently deployed. So you could have some legacy service that never changes, but then you could have another service alongside it that gets deployed every few hours. It makes maintenance easier because if a microservice breaks, it's not your entire application that breaks, it's just one little piece of it. And it makes scaling easier because you can, if you have these small services running, you could say, oh, well, people are really liking that one specific service. We need to actually have 3 of those in order to handle the traffic. Then rather than taking your entire application and making it 3 times bigger to handle 3 times as much traffic, you can just take that one microservice and make it scale as it needs while leaving the others with what they need. And this is sort of in opposition to monolithic architecture is usually what people say. And so in monolithic architecture, you have sort of one big centralized thing that does everything. And yeah, yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that for now. So of course, there's lots of challenges with microservices architecture. There's like, if you start Googling around, you'll find a number of websites that talk about what they are and why they're great, but then you'll find like an order of magnitude more being like, oh my gosh, everyone's going to microservices and it's a terrible idea. It doesn't make any sense. It makes everything harder. And I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to that. So you sort of need to be careful. So when you have all of these microservices, you now have a very complex orchestration and deployment sort of ecosystem. So if you have a monolith, you have one thing and you have to get that one thing deployed. But if you have like 5 or 10 or 100 microservices, you have to get all of those deployed. And then you also have to keep up the connections between them and make sure they're all sort of deployed in the right place, behind the right URLs, and everyone has the right access to the right things. And so if you aren't careful with how you manage this orchestration and deployment, and if you don't automate it, then yeah, things just get totally unmanageable. There's also more complexity around networking and resiliency. So you have to maintain all of these connections between the different microservices. And then you have to also be able to handle if one microservice goes down. Well, you have microservices, so it shouldn't bring down your entire application. But you have to like account for that and make sure that that's true. Then if you think about monitoring and log aggregation to understand what users are doing and where errors are happening, you now have, rather than just one monolith to monitor, you have every single one of your microservices to monitor. So you have to be really careful and kind of build that as you go and aggregate everything in the same place. And so really, for microservices to work, you have to sort of define your own standards and really follow them. And so this is in different, I think this can be interpreted in a few different ways. So since microservices communicate over APIs, then you have to really enforce that contract. And so this goes back to the first thing I said about APIs being a interface that tells you what the inputs are, what the outputs are, and what it does. You really can't change that interface. And if you need to update that, then you need to make a version 2 of that interface, but keep version 1 of that interface there. Because if you start making incompatible changes to those interfaces, then all of these complex connections between your microservices would break. There's also standards around all 3 of these things above. So yeah, you have all of these complex orchestration and networking and deployment issues to sort out for every single one of your microservices. And so if you don't have a like a way of doing that, then every time you create a new microservice, you have to solve all these problems again and again and again and again. And so it really can't be that way. You have to figure out how you deploy, how you orchestrate, and then when you add a new microservice, you just fit it right into that pattern in order to not just totally create way more work for yourself, if that sort of makes sense. Cool. Yeah, so I'm gonna go through a few little diagrams here. So I think if you start looking online, you'll also see other versions of these sorts of diagrams. This is just an example. So this is my totally sketchy monolith marketplace. It's totally sketchy because I'm biased towards microservices, I guess, or something like that. And so here you have your client, you have your database, and then you have an application that does everything. It manages your users, your inventory, your orders, creates recommendations, lets users post reviews, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, and I mean, you can kind of see why it's called a monolith, right? This is a nice timely reference. Cool. So then, yeah, this is my super legit microservices marketplace. And this is what most of the diagrams look like when you look for these diagrams online. It's like, okay, in your microservices marketplace, you have API gateway. So this handles like routing traffic, and it handles a lot of the like orchestration and deployment complexities. And then beneath that API gateway, oh, you have all these nice, perfect, tiny little microservices. You have a user service, inventory service, order service, review service, recommendation service. And those are all like nice, perfect little things under this one thing. And of course, they have all of their connections between them to make them work. So these are all like API requests going between your microservices. So like recommendations might need to see what the users have ordered and then look at how those users have reviewed their order, and then it'll be able to come up with a recommendation. Yeah, but I think this is very unrealistic. So this is my more realistic online marketplace and kind of a more realistic idea of what microservices give you. Like, I think in reality, to get here, you have to like, start from square one, knowing that this is where you want to be. But much more realistically, you'll probably have some, whatever, like you just started a business and you did it as easy as you could. You just shoved it all in an application. Okay, you have your inventories, orders, and reviews. That we had an application that did that. But now I want to start using microservices rather than just adding stuff to this monolith. So this is kind of, yeah. So this here was like an old monolith that you're now adding microservices to. So maybe you start by integrating with an external identity provider. So that's kind of like an external microservice. And that does a lot of your user management. And then maybe you have a better, more user-friendly API you want for your orders. So you could like build this microservice, but really this is a pretty lightweight thing that just does some data translation and translates back to the legacy orders API. Maybe you get a really impressive team of algorithm writers who make a new recommendations algorithm rather than maybe they write that in some different language that's great for this complex algorithm. Rather than trying to stuff that into the monolith, you can just make a little microservice that connects there. Maybe you'd want some totally new functionality. You can write that as has a microservice, and then this last one here is okay. Maybe now you've done all this and you see how you can really build a better inventory microservice. So you take what you've learned out of the monolith and actually create a new sort of microservice here. Yeah, I feel like this is sort of a realistic architecture you'll get to. And like that's a lot better to think about microservices as a tool for a tool for kind of like building out things in a small piecemeal kind of way, rather than like architecture for an entire application. Cool. And yeah, I mean, this is such an even bigger can of worms than anything else I've talked about. And there's just like so much involved here that you can Google. So of course, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google all have their way of dealing with microservices and letting you deploy your microservices. Containerization is something you probably want to do. Kubernetes is a way of managing this, like doing the orchestration. API gateway, like actually knowing what this gray box is. A service mesh helps you manage all these little red arrows. GitOps, that helps you with deployment. Cloud monitoring to figure out how all of your logs get centralized. Yeah, those are all. That's just, I don't know. You could just Google for a week and learn more and more. Maybe that's a place to start. Okay, now I'm gonna start talking about FastAPI. Which, yeah, plenty of time. So FastAPI is cool. Yeah, it's a modern Python web framework for microservices. It's declarative. It validates your data, provides documentation, and it's async, which potentially makes it faster as long as you implement your async stuff well. And it follows modern Python. And so it's, yeah, I think that's like all I have there. And then I'm going to jump into a demo. I think probably because people are interested in comparison to Flask. So I think it's quite similar to Flask in that it's lightweight. Like, I mean, that's the biggest thing. Like when you're building these microservices, you don't want a lot of baggage. You just want a lightweight thing, and then you want it to do exactly what you want, I guess. And you want to import the things you need and not import the things you don't want. So FastAPI is not quite as lightweight as Flask because it has the sort of data validation and documentation built into it. But in my mind, those pieces are totally necessary for building a RESTful API, because you want to create a nice clear interface that you can document and that you can like validate the incoming data with. And so in the same way that that Dan used the Django REST framework, there's a few similar other libraries that you can import into Flask to get that kind of RESTful functionality. But with FastAPI, it comes built in. And I think that's important because that's kind of the most critical part of building an API in my mind. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I think there are a few different libraries. All right, so here we go. I am now just going to dive in and go until it's time to stop. Making a FastAPI microservice. And so this is a bit different than, well, it's kind of similar to Dan's presentation in that I'm starting from scratch. But I think when you say starting from scratch with something like Django, it's a bit different than when you're starting from scratch with something like FastAPI. So there's no database, no users, no authentication, none of that comes with FastAPI. It just is, it's just what you write on the page. Yep. So, all right, let's make an app, I think. I wonder if I can, I'm gonna try to move this. I don't know if I can move my Zoom chat to this window. Okay, I'm not gonna worry about it. All right, so where are we? So I think that you can, yeah, hopefully you can follow along. Maybe the environment that you made for Dan's presentation should work, or you could make a new environment just as long as you install the the packages in requirements.txt. Cool. So then to make a service here, you can just start out app equals FastAPI. Okay, cool. And in order to get FastAPI, we have to import FastAPI. Cool. So that's kind of like the basics. And then before I demo it, we want to have something to demo. So let's just make a nice, totally simple get endpoint. So to do that, we can say app.get. And so this is, it's a decorator, so it's going to act on whatever I'm writing below it. And what it does is it says, okay, now apply the get method to whatever I write here. So I'm going to say /rules. And then I'm going to make a function get pool rules. Great. And it's async def. So everything in FastAPI is async. I think for now, mostly the only way that'll manifest is that I'm writing async def instead of def. I'm going to copy my rules from up here, which you can read if you care to understand my goofy hockey pool. It's not actually a hockey pool that is a real thing. It's just something I made up because it was a nice way to create some classes. Great. And so this API is a JSON API. So if we just return a dictionary, that's all we need to do. Okay, so we created this Python dictionary, gave it the rules. So ideally, when someone does a get at this endpoint, they get, the rules here. So let's see if that works. Let's see if it works. So the way we actually run this is we can use something called Uvicorn, which is in your requirements. So if you installed your requirements, you should have it installed. And this is a server for ASGI web frameworks, I guess. And I also, I guess if you want this command, I put it in run.sh is the command, so you can copy and paste it from there. But really all you need to do is Uvicorn and then point it to the file that your application is in, and then the name of your application. So this is called service.py, and the thing in there is app. And so that's how it knows how to find this. And then I'm just going to say reload. That's the only other command line argument I'm going to use. That means if I make changes to the code, it'll reload the server without having to run this command again. Cool. That seems good. So now we can see if it's working by going, we can even just go in our browser here. Hey, look at that. So we just went to localhost 8000 /rules. That's it. So that is, we've now created a nice static rules microservice. Does very little. I guess we need to fix our space here. And since we have the automatic reload on, hopefully this habat will be fixed when I refresh. Yep, there we go. Great. So this is cool, I think. Well, I think it's really cool. Hopefully, I think it's at least a little cool how easy that is. So one thing that FastAPI has that is great is that without anything here, so I didn't say anything about docs here. This is all that's being run. There is a docs endpoint, and that's kind of this really nice OpenAPI specification for your API. And so we have this one get endpoint /rules. Have some information about it, but not a ton of information. We only know that, like, for example, a successful response is just JSON, and it can't provide an application, or it can't provide an example. We don't know what the schema is. And so if you hand this documentation to someone, they might not be super happy with this. They're like, well, what am I actually going to get in this response? I'm going to get some sort of JSON. Cool. So let's add that. So this is where Pydantic comes in our declarative code, is we can now create a class that we can call maybe rule just rules. Is that easy enough? Rules, sure. And this is going to be a base model, which means we now need Pydantic. And the reason that Pydantic and FastAPI work so well together, it's not coincidence. It's like FastAPI is built on Pydantic. But I think that's okay because Pydantic is really great. And so what does our rules class look like? Just has rules and it's a string. So now we have this class, and then we just need to say, okay, well, when you get /rules, you're going to get a response model, I think is what it is, of rules. Great. And so hopefully this didn't change when we get rules. We still get our nice JSON response. But now when we go to docs, we have a bit more information. We now have this schema here, this rule schema, and that's actually plugged in here so we can see, okay, the schema of this successful response is going to be rules. And there's an example. So I feel like that's pretty good, pretty good. Yep. What's next? I'm gonna go and maybe see if there's, yeah. Feel free to interrupt with questions. I'm just gonna kind of now run out the clock, making this do more. Yep. So cool. So I think the idea here is, okay, you want to pick some teams, guess how many combined goals they have at the end of the season, and the closest guess takes all, whatever all might be. So that means, okay, we need some sort of submissions, right? Because people have to submit their guesses. So let's make a submissions endpoint. Cool, and we'll sort out what the response schema is going to be here in a little bit. Get submissions. Okay, cool. So now what do we want to return in submissions? Let's maybe make a new model here. All right. So I think I'd like this to be just a list of links to the submissions. So I'm going to say that submissions is a list of, I could just start out with string. So this API endpoint, we're going to use to get all of the current submissions. Right now, there aren't any submissions. If you look at our 28 lines of code, it seems pretty dicey for us to even have any ability to save submissions because unlike Django, we don't have any database. We don't have any user authentication. We don't have any of that. We have to make it up ourselves, which, yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons. Like that gives us the flexibility to do what we want, and it gives us the flexibility to avoid things we don't want. For example, I don't have any desire for my little hockey pool that I'm making for this upcoming season to be authenticated. So I'm just not going to worry about that, which is probably a terrible idea, but so it goes. Okay, so then this is here. So, okay, we don't have any submissions. So it's actually pretty easy to return a list of all our submissions because it's just an empty list. Then we can add our response model here. Great. Cool, let's see if that worked. It's having trouble working, but it's trying. Oh, look at that, that's right, because we have errors. Of course we have errors. I didn't even update my imports. So it doesn't know what this list is. We need to say from typing import list. And if you're keeping track, typing is a is from the Python standard library, so I'm putting it at the top. Let's see if that's working now. Okay, cool, that's a little bit happier. So now if we refresh this here, there's this new entry for submissions. Submissions list, a list of strings. Great, cool. So what can we do next? I think probably what we want to do, maybe something interesting to do to kind of finish this up, is to make it so we can create submissions. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, cool. So I am going to hijack from my Declarative Code and Decorators notebook this thing that I already wrote in Pydantic. Hockey pool entry. Cool. Okay, and then what did we add? We added this field thing here. So we needed to import field as well for that, but I think we have everything else. We have list, we have base model. Okay, so now this is the model we want for our hockey pool entry. So now we're talking about making a post request. So this is actually a user adding data. So as you might be able to guess, you just do .post instead of .get. You can give it the same endpoint if you want. Cool. And then async def add submission. And then you can give it some input here. Submission is a hockey pool entry. And so here we go. This is another nice FastAPI thing. So now, since it's a post method, we need to expect some incoming data. And so we can say, okay, the incoming data is just coming into this function, and it's this model. And then, yeah, so let's just start from here. So this is going to be a pretty unfair API. So we're not actually saving anything right now. We are just claiming that we're going to save something. So what we've created now is we've created now this post functionality to the submissions endpoint. We say, okay, you give your submission, which looks like this, and you'll get a response which matches your submission. And then probably in the documentation there, I say, we don't actually save it, just so you aren't too bent out of shape when it's not actually saved. And if we reload this again, let's just take a look at what we have in the docs. Great. So now we have this new thing, posting submissions. And now just from the code, we have the request body with the schema from there. This just comes from that input value that we added. That just comes from this input here. And then we have a response. We know what the response is. And then it also says, okay, there might be a validation error if the data you're posting is invalid. Cool. So yeah, we can maybe even try it, hey? Let's try it. So I have this notebook here. This is also, I put this on Google Colab, but it's not gonna work from there since it hits localhost. But I'm running it locally now, so it should work just fine. I'm using this instead of a different type of REST client. So I'm just using Python requests to make requests to my API. So just to make sure this is working, let's get the rules endpoint again. So this is saying, okay, just your base URL, which is localhost/rules. Yep, that's still working okay. And then hopefully submissions is still working okay. Yeah, cool. All right, and now we have, we now should be able to post to submissions with some data here. So this is my nice valid thing, my name, my teams, my prediction. Let's see if that worked. Yeah, cool, okay. So that worked fine. Since we are also the developers of the code, we know that nothing was saved and nothing actually happened. But it worked okay. So let's take a look now. Let's be some nefarious dude who saw that this API was public and wants to just break it by giving -1 for a prediction. Maybe that'll make them win the pool at the end. Oh, but they got a 422 response. And if you look at that, it actually has all of this nice information about what went wrong. So it says, okay, location in the body, your prediction, will ensure this value is greater than or equal to 0. Yeah, so they got a nice slap on the wrist for putting a -1 in their prediction field. Yeah, and this is quite cool because this is now, like, even though this function doesn't do anything really, in these 3 lines, we've created a really clear contract with what you need to submit, what you're going to get back. And if you don't do that, then it's going to not work. And we defined what that is in this nice declarative way. Cool. I think I'm going to stop there now because we have 10 minutes left and it's probably more useful to tackle a few questions. If you look at what I have committed in the GitHub repo, I go a bit further with this and I actually save submissions. Like when you post, it actually saves the submissions. And then I have the thing that like computes the score based on your prediction. Yeah, but I don't know. That's that. So let's see, how do I stop sharing my screen? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for now, and then yeah. Cool. How are people doing? I think you're muted if you're talking.
Oops, yes, I'm muted. Thank you so much, Franklin. That's a really good course about FastAPI. And anyone who has questions for Franklin, please feel free to mute yourself. Yeah, a lot of appreciations from the chat.
Yeah. Here, I'll post a link to the Hockey Pool API notebook. I did put it on collab. Let's see, there's a link in the README as well.
Hey, Frank, just a quick suggestion. If you could make as much detailed comments on the actual code as possible and commit it, that'll be great.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I will. I'll kind of keep working at it.
Okay, thanks.
For the next little bit. Yeah, I saw Peter answering Alex's question about what is used for long-running tasks. Yeah, I mean, I think that's like Celery is like a task queue. So like basically you can have a microservice that actually is like that has the resources to do compute heavy things, and then you have your microservice that actually handles the request. So you can have this really lightweight microservice that takes your inputs and is able to handle 1 million requests at a time, and then passes them off to the Celery queue, and the Celery queue works a lot more slowly and has the resources to do these these bigger computational things. Yeah, I think Celery is a great place to start. That's one I've used in the past too. More about what I do. Yeah, so the company I work for, we have had a geologic modeling desktop software for a bunch of time. That's like kind of what got the company going. And so it was basically the software where you could take drill holes and then model a surface. So you take this kind of sparse data and then model a surface from there. And then on top of that was a data management tool where people were able to version their models. Because if you think about gathering data in the field, like you might have 5 drill holes as a preliminary study, and then you create a model and then it looks promising. You go back and drill 100 more, and then you update your model, and then you maybe start digging a hole and like extracting from there, and you can continue to update your model. So a big problem that customers had was actually wanting to manage that over time. Yeah, I kind of see the changes. So this was even before I was part of the company. They built this, they built a sort of web service for doing that, where you could model and access your data, but it was built as a monolith. So it's actually quite similar to the like realistic example that I showed, except it wasn't a store, it was this geologic modeling thing. So there was this huge monolith to do this data management, but it was actually like running in a Windows VM in the cloud. And so now we're working on improving that and breaking it up and making it more scalable. So we're doing exactly what I showed, where we have this monolith that we're taking parts out of and adding things to. And so like I've made an API to translate some of the data that's stored there. Actually, I could share my screen again just to kind of show you what these boxes actually are. Let's see, is it back there? Oh yeah, here we go. So for me, this box here, this is like the geological modeling. Doesn't actually do geologic modeling, it just does the data management. And so then I wrote this API that actually, that's designed to be user facing. So it takes some of the really like crummy API practices here that were just created because just created as they were needed to be created, because this was developed in a realistic way where people weren't thinking about 10 years in the future when they built it. But now we are 10 years in the future. And so we do want to expose a nice API that customers can consume that still accesses that underlying data. And then we also have notifications for when you get a new model published. We're working on a block model service for like handling complex data, or like handling bigger data in a better way. And so like this is actually exactly what my job is. Maybe that answers your question some. Oh, I think I just got my presentation. I didn't stop sharing my screen. Cool. Let's see, the FastAPI version. I don't know. I think it's pretty stable. I thought it was on version. Oh yeah, I'm not sure. It is a new thing, a relatively new thing, but it's like very, very quickly growing in popularity. Yeah, so I'd be reasonably comfortable that it's stable enough. Cool. The large jump from week 2 to week 3. I mean, yeah, that's true. I think the large jump is just like practice, I guess. And I feel like the best way to do practice is to like have actual things to try to do. So like my background's in geology and geophysics, and so I started learning Python when I got my current job, actually 5 years ago. And so for that, when I started, we needed to write a Python client for the existing API. And I was given that task, and like I didn't know what APIs were, and I hadn't written much Python. And yeah, and I mean, just like doing that is how I learned it. I feel like that's like, it's kind of like a privileged place to be, to have that sort of ability to be given a real problem and then the flexibility to figure out how to solve it. But I think it is something that you can kind of create on your own too, if you want to. If you have some like project you want to do, just kind of dive in. That's kind of a crummy answer, but that's my answer at least.
I actually want to add a little bit more to that too. So basically week 1 and 2, they're all Python fundamentals. So in order to do anything, you get to learn all those fundamentals before you can actually do anything. And then week 3 and 4 is more practical. So after you learn how to use a programming language, you should be able to use that programming language to tackle any real life problems. That's a goal for the week 3 and 4. Yeah, there will be a huge jump because there are so many knowledge concepts you have to learn, but at least we showed you a couple different ways of our actual industrial project. And then my suggestion is that if you found these things are like difficult, try to figure out your own project. Let's say like make an online bookstore or like to-do list, something like that. Find your sweet spot and your interest and actually do the hands-on stuff, implement something and practice yourself. And during that process, you may find yourself like having way too many problems. And then you could easily just like tackle each problem one by one, do the Google search to figure them out or ask in the channels. By doing that, you will learn and master Python really, really well and quickly.
Mhm. And one thing just to add to that, again, the way that I kind of view it is code is a lot like Lego. And essentially the first couple of weeks, what we did is show you what type of Lego pieces are out there. But now with web development and in the next week, machine learning, we're kind of showing you some of the cool Lego sets that you can use to be able to kind of do some of these things. So don't get discouraged if this thing doesn't come to you naturally or come to you in the first 5 minutes. It's just like Lego. You should just have fun, just trying to tinker around, building stuff. And if you do come into problems, there's the Slack channel, the Pi Bootcamp channel. There's, I think, a Pi YYC Slack channel, and there's an Edmonton Pi Slack channel as well, where everybody wants to help because everybody's been stuck on some of these Lego sets at some point in time.
That's it. That is really well said by Dan and Carson. So I think the course is finished for today. Feel free to stay if you have any questions for our course leaders. And also a huge kudos to yourself by making the time for the past 3 weeks to participate in our Python bootcamp. And I hope that everyone can get some